Hey, what up, ladies and gentlemen? Thank you for joining another episode of No Cap Radio. We back again, man. What can I say? Reese, how you feeling, man?
It's crazy. This is the what, fourth?
Y'all see me, man. Mr. Joshua Cole here has joined us for a fourth time, ladies and gentlemen. And you know, we sort of spoke this into existence.
Oh, yeah.
Back about 10 months ago when you were last on. I said, hey, it might be a fourth. I'm pretty sure it will be, and here we are. This is a manifestation of that. So thank y'all for joining. Once again, I want to remind you all to like, comment, subscribe to the channel. We would love for y'all to join us and stay tuned in with us, because we're bringing education, information, and inspiration to your local community. So here we're here with the delegate, Virginia delegate, Mr. Joshua Cole. And the last time you invited us down to the General Assembly building, and you were actually in office, you know, and for that 60 days. And I know you mentioned that, yes, that 60 days is up, but you all are still going back and forth. So tell us, what's that about?
Yeah. So the way Virginia works is the General Assembly, the Virginia House of Delegates, and the Virginia State Senate, we're technically only in session every year, January through March.
Right.
And so we literally have to get all of our work done in 60 days, right?
Yeah.
And we had a guy who worked for us who came from Congress, and he said, man, y'all are super efficient. Y'all get done in 60 days what Congress can't even get done in 2 years.
So, like, what are y'all doing to prepare to get everything done in those 60 days? That's tough.
So, when you came and saw us in January, when you guys came down, many of my colleagues had just gotten elected. So, from November to January, they were trying to hustle to figure out what bills they were going to introduce, what ideas to get done. And so now, going into this January coming up, we're going to be a little bit more prepared, those of us who are just coming back. Some of the people who had been delegates for the very first time, senators for the first time, they had a hustle. Now they've had all year. After they finished their first session, they've had all year to prepare for this session coming up in January. And so as the session ended in March, we've had to come back a couple times to deal with the budget. We have what's called a divided government in Virginia. So the House and the Senate are controlled by Democrats, but our governor is a Republican. So we did not agree on a state budget. So we passed the budget out of the General Assembly. The governor wanted to veto it, and we're like, nah. Let's come back to the table and let's renegotiate. So we left in March. We had to come back in April to renegotiate. We came back again to do some things. There were some things going on with military funding in schools, so we had to come back for that. And then outside of the session, many of us are on what we call commissions or committees that meet outside of the session. So I'm on the Rural Healthcare Committee, and we have been doing field trips all over the state, going down to Chilhowie, Virginia, going to the Eastern Shore, going to Farmville, doing tours of rural hospitals, doctor's offices, free clinics, dental offices, just to figure out what we as a state can do to improve healthcare in the rural parts of Virginia. So there's been a lot of traveling going on my part for that part.
So what are y'all finding with those travels?
So what I'm going to say is very interesting, right? Because when I think about rural healthcare and rural hospitals, we normally think about people who don't have any money. We typically think about maybe dilapidated hospitals. But I have been thoroughly impressed with the technology that maybe Southwest Virginia has, or Eastern Shore has. Now, of course, there are health issues, right? The last place I was on the Eastern Shore, and they said the Eastern Shore of Virginia has the highest concentration of diabetes in the entire Commonwealth of Virginia. Then you go down to Southwest Virginia, while they may have the technology. So watch this, the doctors are not in Southwest Virginia. The doctors may be in Roanoke, but they zoom in to the hospital that's 2 hours away. And they have nurses down there. They use iPad, and they have these weird, crazy digital doctor's tools, like a digital stethoscope, all that stuff. And the doctor's in Roanoke, 2 hours away, and the nurse is using all this digital equipment to send the information to the doctor in real time. Wow. And so that blew my mind, because I did not think we had technology like that, right? But the fact still remains that there are still issues that many people in rural parts of Virginia are dealing with, whether it's mental health, whether it's diabetes, whether it's dental care, or even having access to get to the hospital, because you could live 45 minutes away from your closest doctor, your closest hospital, and how are you going to get there? And especially if these people are low-income community workers, where it's literally a paycheck to drive to the closest hospital, right? And so now you have to determine, am I use this paycheck to get to the hospital to find out what's wrong with me, or am I going to pay my bills? Am I going to get to the doctor and find out what's wrong with me, or I'm going to ration off my medication, just hope I make it? And so those are all the different issues that we're seeing faced down in various parts of Virginia. So it's cool that we have the technology, but there's still more things that we have to do.
Yeah. And I'm sure there's additional costs to get those type of access to that technology. That's far beyond their paychecks or whatever. Wow, man. And I heard you speak about the Department of Education. So what exactly are y'all working on in that department?
Well, we actually have a fight on our hands with the Office of the Governor right now. And this is why I always tell people it's so important to make sure you're voting and you're paying attention in every election. Because every so many years, whoever the governor is at that time, I think it's like maybe every 7 or so many years or so, the governor is the one who gets to, or his team gets to rewrite and redo how public schools are run in the entire Commonwealth of Virginia.
Okay.
And so the governor that we have now is in the process of changing the way schools are ranked, the way that schools are determined if they're eligible for funding. And he's in the process of changing if schools are going to be accredited. And so he has released a new plan, and the strong possibility is that many of the schools that he has redone this plan for will not meet his standards. And so if they don't meet his standards, the state comes in and takes complete control of those school divisions. That's a little bit scary, right? And many of those school divisions that are going to be impacted by this new change that the governor has done will most likely be Black and brown school divisions, low-income school divisions that are trying to make ends meet with the little bit of funds they do have to hire educators. And so it's a possibility, and this is not fear-mongering or try to scare anybody, but it's a strong possibility that Fredericksburg City Schools could come under direct supervision of the governor's office if the schools in Fredericksburg City, public schools, do not meet the governor's requirements as relates to education.
And he makes that call single-handedly as the governor?
As the governor, who has the Secretary of Education as a part of his cabinet, that is absolutely something he has full reign to do.
So have either of you all heard of the new standardized testing that's coming down from this? Is that from the governor or the state of Virginia?
So standardized testing is required by the federal government, and that's a good question for me that I don't know, believe it or not. That's something I don't know.
Have you heard of it, like the new testing?
But there are new standards that the governor has released, right?
So they came from the governor himself.
Yeah, and even when it comes to like the curriculum of what's being taught in the schools, I don't know if you remember a couple of years ago when Governor Youngkin first got elected, but there was a whole tussle going on over one of the new plans that he released had completely removed Martin Luther King from the history books in Virginia. It had completely changed the name of, instead of saying enslaved Africans or slaves, it changed it completely to indentured servants. And we know from learning, I grew up in Stafford County Public Schools, we were taught there's a difference between indentured servants and enslaved people. And so there was a big tussle over that because the governor's office was trying to change the way certain history was being taught. And so, thankfully we were able to block that with legislation that we did. And we even now have to take a fine comb and look at this new authority that the governor, well, not new authority, but it's authority that the governor's always had. But some people just don't take advantage. And so now that this governor has taken advantage of it to rein in and pull in these school divisions, which on the surface it sounds good. If the school divisions aren't doing good, cool, the state's going to come in and do what it has to do. That sounds good on the surface. But when you understand what this particular gubernatorial administration has been doing as relates to education, going after African American history, going after the real history that should be taught in our schools, that's very concerning.
It seems like that's the main thing. That's what you hear about all the time. Is the history is going to be changed.
Yeah. And I think it's key to understand too, right, that history is always written from the view of the oppressor and never from the view of the oppressed. And when history is written from the view of the oppressor, they get to hide what they want to hide. Right. They get to tell the story how they want to tell it.
Right. And then I think about if the governor's, sending these new standards, what's being done to improve the schools to meet those standards?
Right.
Where does the pressure fall on? Is it the teachers, the students, the parents? Where does that pressure, that extra pressure to meet those new standards?
And they're changing because of basically we're looking at test scores.
Right. And it's a couple different things, right? When we take a look at what's happening, and I have to do it like this, I have to go all the way back, right? There has constantly been an attack on public schools, consistently. My godmother was a public educator, and so we have to see how the goal is to get rid of public schools. So you do this thing where you say these schools aren't meeting qualifications, they're not meeting standards. And so then they lose what's called accreditation. And then when they lose accreditation, then they lose certain funding. And then when they lose certain funding, what's going to happen to some of those teachers who are teaching in those schools?
Yeah, they gone.
They're going to bounce, and they're going to go find another school division where they can teach in. And when all of that happens, who really suffers?
The students.
The kids who are really suffering. And this scenarios typically only happen typically in black and brown predominant school divisions or low income school divisions, right? And so for real, it's the kids who really lose because they're missing out on education. And if you look at it, when that whole scenario happens, then the other side says, okay, well, you know what? Let's take money from the schools and let's create charters so that you can send your kid to private school. Well, that sounds good. Now you have a shiny new object that you can look at, but I have a question. If the school is already having a problem, why would you take more funding from the schools when the school is already having a problem? Then catch this. Now you're sending your school to a private school, but your kid has an IEP or your kid has a disability. Private schools are not held to the same standard as public education. And so now you have removed your student from one school, placed them in another school, and guess what? Their problem is still not being solved. Now their problem has probably been multiplied because you have this other private school that doesn't have the resources it needs to help your kid because it's not being held to the same standard as the public schools. So instead of taking money from the public schools, we should be reinvesting. And then I hear people say right now, well, if you're putting more money in the schools, that's only going to make the problem worse. Well, we have to make sure that we're combating the issues all around. You can invest more money in the schools, but then you have to make sure you have the right educators there, right? And so Virginia, we are trying to make sure that we are pulling the right educators in. If you're down in Fredericksburg City Schools, which is a predominantly African-American school division. Now, Fredericksburg is predominantly white, but Fredericksburg City Schools is predominantly African-American or brown. Why is that?
They're all in private schools?
The well-to-do kids go to Fredericksburg Christian or Fredericksburg Academy, while the kids who can't afford to go to private schools go to JM, go to Walker Grant, go to Lafayette Upper Elementary. And so what we're having, the problem is now, we have to make sure we're pulling in educators who are going to know what it means to deal with students who look like us. And this is why it's so important that diversity matters. You hear them talk about this whole DEI thing, ooh, it's scary, ooh. No, when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, what we're saying is, especially from an education perspective, we need educators who are going to teach us the way we know how to be taught, right? Because when you bring and this is not to be to slight anybody because I love all my teachers, but when you bring an educator from Wisconsin who has never interacted with a predominantly black school division, and you plop her in the middle of a predominantly black inner city school division, them kids gonna run her up out of there. But if you bring a black mama who's a teacher who done dealt with all these nappy head kids, and you plop her in the middle of that division, and them kids try to pop and go off on her, she's gonna pop back and she's gonna be able to control that classroom. And so we have to make sure that we have the right educators, not just teachers in the classroom, but bus drivers, lunch ladies, administrators, so they know how to deal with our kids, right? And it is so important, instead of just taking money away, we should be investing in, then recruiting the right educators to be here and making sure that our kids can do better.
So we always want to know what's the solution, right, for us, but it sounds more of an internal solution.
Yeah, and so we have to make sure, again, when I look at Spotsylvania County Public Schools, they just hired a new black superintendent. And of course, some people already got issues with him. The man ain't even been here long enough to get his feet wet and implement some of his plans, and people already have issues with him. But I've seen how he's interacted with students. He's real cool. The students like him. He understands the problems that they're dealing with, and he comes from a smaller division, right? So Spotsylvania is bigger for him, but he's come from a smaller division where he's dealt with a lot of poverty, where he's dealt with a lot of kids with mental health issues, where he dealt with a lot of kids whose parents are working a lot and may not be around, and he's going to be able to bring that same mentality to Spotsylvania County schools, where a lot of kids are still dealing with the same issues too.
So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it almost sounds like you favor the public school or funding the public schools over the private schools.
Well, I think private schools have their place, right? And you're hearing a lot of people who say, oh, I don't want this to happen in the schools. I don't want my kids reading these books in the schools. I don't want my kids to be around these kids. Well, great. Take your kid to private school and you can make those demands. But when you have a public school, the public school is supposed to serve the needs of everyone in public, right? So you're going to have a diverse melting pot in public schools. You're going to have Muslim students. You're going to have Christian students. You're going to have Jewish students. You're going to have black students, Latino students, Asian students. And so you're bringing those all together. And the amazing part about America is we were created to be the great mixing pot so that we can learn from everyone's differences, not be offended by everyone's differences.
Man, and I don't want to offend anybody that's sending their children to private schools, but like you said, if they're not held to the same standards of the public schools, are the children actually getting a better education there or not?
And I don't want to, and again, not to down private schools, because I think private schools are doing amazing things, right? And we look at some communities where certain students go to private school, they need that extra oomph. Some of these private schools are teaching at a higher standard too, right? And so for those who are able to do that, for those who are able to get scholarships, we don't want to down that. But what we also want to do is stop downing public education, stop talking bad about our educators, and stop making it seem that public schools are bad when many of us are products of public school, and we need public school. It was even in the 1960s and 50s, right here in Virginia, where black and brown parents protested and went to the General Assembly and said, we want public education for our students. And they protested, and it became a part of the state constitution. So now in Virginia, we have to have public schools due to the work of our ancestors and our grandmama and grandpapa and them who did what they did to make sure that black and brown kids had access to public schools like their white counterparts.
Yeah, and those private schools are like the cost of an apartment.
Cost of college.
Like, you know what I mean? Like per year. I'm like,
He ain't talking about, obviously we can give our flowers to the teachers, right? We love our educators.
Yeah.
Now I know the last time we talked, we did talk about trying to change the budget, the salary for teachers, right? Where is that at right
So
now?
we were able to give a little bit of increase. There's still more that needs to be done. And that's what I was telling earlier. We had this fight in the budget. So we give a little increase. It's a little increase. And, you know, I really feel bad for our educators because we keep giving these little pennies on the dollars. Oh, I appreciate you. Here's your 3% raise. And there's so much more that we need to do. And we're even still losing educators to other divisions. And it's a really in-depth policy discussion to talk about why Fredericksburg is not able to pay as much as Stafford and why Stafford's not able to pay as much as Prince William and Loudoun County. But there has to be some work that has to be done there. We're still working on that. I don't think that's going to be able to be solved overnight. But as the delegate who represents Stafford, Spotsylvania, and Fredericksburg, I'm doing everything I can to make sure we get that money raised for our teachers in this region so that we keep those educators and we're able to recruit them here too.
And I don't know if you're able to disclose about the budget or anything, but is that where you all wanted the majority of the money to go to the Department of Education?
No, so the budget is huge, and the budget is public. So there's nothing done underneath the table. You all can go right to it's called lis.virginia.gov. That you'll be able to find everything, every bill idea, every law that was created, the entire budget, what goes in the budget, what comes out of the budget, all of that is public, and it's right there on the LIS website. And so the budget has to do with how we run the government, how we pay state employees, how we handle government contracts in Virginia, how we pay our educators, how we support our public universities. So there's so much money that goes into the state budget and where all that money goes to. And so I'm actually proud that for Stafford County Public Schools, the city of Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania, they racked up on some good money out of the state budget this year. So I know even Fredericksburg and Stafford themselves got a little bit over $1 million just for, the technical training, STEM schooling, for STEM classes for our students. And so I was really excited about that. We were able to lock that money down and get it back to this region.
Okay, so that part passed. Is other parts of the budget that you all still...
And what I'll say is not necessarily that it didn't pass, but we could have done a little bit more, in my opinion. But that's why I don't lead the money committee, and that's why I'm not on finance. But we were able to do what we had to do. And you have this budget that you have to pull. You have to rob Peter to pay Paul to make sure that everything gets taken care of and paid for. But I'm optimistic in the upcoming years. We have a governor's election coming up next year in Virginia. The governor can only serve one term in Virginia, so there will be a new governor. And I'm optimistic that the new governor coming in, if it's who I'm supporting, will get an increase for teachers.
So is this your last? How long is your term?
So a term is 2 years in the House of Delegates. So I'll be running for re-election again next year.
Wow, man, it's happening so fast, man.
What you saying? So y'all are preparing for the next, what is it?
January
through, right?
January through March next year is what we call the short session in Virginia.
Short session. That's what y'all are preparing for now.
We're preparing bills. I already have a meeting on legislation and talking about what we're going to do for next year already. Yep.
So what's new? Can you give us anything?
Absolutely. So one of the things I'm working on is mental health and workforce development. I'm looking at a bill idea right now where, President Biden and Vice President Harris has already talked about doing this on the federal level, where as long as you have experience, we're finding that there are people who are applying for like federal jobs and state jobs, but maybe they don't have a degree, they're not getting hired. They have the experience they need, but they don't have the degree. So I'll be carrying a bill coming up in January, which will take away the degree requirements. As long as you have the experience necessary for a state government job, you won't have to worry about the degree. So I'll be carrying that. I'm also exploring options where we're seeing a bunch of government contracting jobs that are here in the Northern Virginia area that want to hire students right out of high school. But they can't hire them because they don't have a public trust or a security clearance. So I'm looking at exploring an option where students starting in the 10th to 11th grade can do what they need to do, get that security clearance. So once they graduate with a security clearance, get a job, starting off at about 50, 65K right out of high school. And then when you have the clearance, that government contracting job will hire you and then pay for your degree. So within 3 to 4 years, you come out of high school making 65K. By the time you're 21, 22, you're going to be making $85,000 to $100,000.
With no student
loan. Exactly. That's what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to level that playing field. And then if we do that right here in this region, we want to make sure that that talent stays in Fredericksburg. So for these kids who want to stay here because this is home for them and they don't want to work at certain different places around here, we want to keep them here. Northrop Grumman is here. We got Booz Allen here. We got some of these other government contractors that are right here, and they can graduate high school and stay right here if they want to.
Nice.
Now talk to us about mental health. Y'all working on that too. What can you tell us?
Mental health, I don't have to tell you how big mental health is a problem for many, many different people. In Virginia, we're finding out that even some of our hospitals don't have enough beds for mental health crises. And so I'm in the process of working with a father now who has a daughter at a particular hospital in Virginia that's about to shut down. They're trying to figure out where they're going to place these patients, because in 2 years this hospital is going to go down. But these patients are patients who have to be there in order to live, right? And so I'm currently working with one of the fathers to find out a way of what we can do to make sure that the state either maintains this hospital in another location or requires the Commonwealth of Virginia to maintain a certain amount of what we call skilled nursing beds, which are beds for students with people living with disabilities or different things like that. Even as it relates to mental health, during the Rural Healthcare Committee, we're finding out that a lot of people, while telehealth is working and there may not be a psychologist or counselor near them, they can do telehealth. We're also finding out that many of these people in rural parts of Virginia, or even go 5 minutes around the corner from me where I live in Stafford, people don't have access to high-speed internet or Wi-Fi or whatever. So we're having to figure out what we can do to give access to telehealth and Wi-Fi. And so you see how all these things are interconnected. You know, one person focuses on mental health, one person focuses on high-speed internet, one person is focusing on transportation. All these things correlate and relate together on how we can get people access to the help they need and the resources they need for mental health.
So is mental health something that you've noticed the government taking, getting his attention, like focusing on that in any way?
A little bit, yes. He has definitely talked about that. Even when I was campaigning for delegate, they would ask me, what things will you work with the governor on? And mental health has been something that we have been able to work on. One of the bills that I passed this year was to mandate our universities in Virginia. Most students get a physical student ID card on their phone, a virtual ID card. And so we told these universities in Virginia to mandate moving forward that on the back of those ID cards or on their student ID cards, they have to include a QR code. Okay. They scan that QR code or they tap that QR code, it's going to take them to a web page on the school's website where they monitor the National Suicide Crisis Hotline, the Domestic Abuse Hotline, the Rape Report Hotline, and the local numbers for the mental health, for the first responders, all of that. So that bill passed. That was one of the bills, first bills that the governor signed. Yeah, so that was one of the first bills that the governor signed for us. And now we're just waiting for the schools to catch up, if y'all are watching, these universities to catch up, to put that information out there, because these students really need it. And we are seeing there, and I don't know what the issue is for real, but anxiety, low self-esteem, depression, suicidal thoughts are on the rise for students, and not just in college, but even some of our high school and middle school students too.
Yeah, I remember you were targeting the universities. Have they not implemented that yet?
So the bill just passed and went into effect in July,
okay.
And so I think they have about a year or so to go ahead and implement that.
Okay, yeah. That's great, man. So this is all on the local level, but I know you got a lot, man, to talk about on this federal level with this big election in a month.
Yeah. So we are a little over 30 some odd days from our presidential election. And here in Virginia, it's big, right? We have the president on the ticket, we have our U.S. Senate on the ticket, and we have our Congress on the ticket. So no matter where in Virginia, if you're watching this, there are 3 major seats that you should be supporting this year: the president, U.S. Senate, and Congress. And I think it's really, really important. And I was just sitting at an event last night, and the lady said, a voteless people is a hopeless people. And we do all these cliches when it comes time for voting and trying to get people to move. You know, people be like, ooh, don't boo, vote. We got all these cliches. Yeah. But I think people have to understand the importance, right? One, to understand that while the president is not the one who makes laws, the president is the one who carries out a lot of the laws that are implemented by Congress. And so when you go vote, don't just vote for the president, but make sure you vote all the way down the ticket, because it's the Senate who creates laws, but it's also the Senate who appoints judges. It's also the Senate who appoints, who approves the president's appointments, right? And then you have Congress who also passes the laws. And so you want to make sure you have a tight team that's working together to get things done we want to see done, right?
And we see that so many decades where it's a divided, like
government,
you said,
like here in Virginia,
government, and it's just at a standstill until that term is over.
I think they've been saying this since the summer, so I assure you it has already passed. This United States Congress that we're looking at right now has been the most unproductive Congress that has ever happened in U.S. history.
For how long?
How long has it been unproductive?
Yeah.
Well, so the Congress went in, they voted in the new speaker, I want to say last year sometime. And since they voted him in, there have been pieces of legislation that have been introduced and it's just sat on his desk, or he's taken no action on it, or there have been constant infighting with the Republican Party, who has control of the House right now federally, right? Yeah. And so there's been infighting, and when they're infighting, nothing gets done. So the Senate is doing what they're doing. They're passing bills out, sending it over, and it's just sitting there. Or you have congresswomen or congressmen who are writing laws, introducing them. They get to the speaker because the speaker is the one who sends them to each committee or whatever, and then the stuff is just sitting there. And so they said this U.S. Congress that we have has been the most unproductive U.S. Congress in American history.
That's sad, man, because it's the citizens who actually suffer as a result of that.
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely.
it's a reason why those bills are being written and turned in.
Yeah, and I gotta do this because I'm an elected Democrat, so I gotta put my partisan hat on. Mm-hmm. So if some of y'all are watching and I offend y'all, I apologize in advance. But look who's causing that stalemate, right? Yeah. It is the Republicans who have control of the House, and because they have control, and if you tell me that, and I tell you this, watch this, if the Democrats had control of the House and we were in the same position, you would not stop hearing about it. The Democrats have done this. The Democrats have done the Democrats. But because the Republicans have control of the House, ain't nobody saying anything, right? But please tell me why they deserve to remain in power if they can't even produce for us.
But you hear a lot of that in the debate too, though.
Absolutely.
Just a lot of the like finger pointing and stuff, and it's like, when are our concerns going to get addressed? Where are they being addressed in these debates? Like, that's what it's really about. To be able to pick a side. Yeah,
I was on Twitter last night, and J.D. Vance, he's former President Trump's vice presidential pick this year. And he had retweeted a post from Vice President Harris and said, cool, thanks, go ahead and do it now. You're the vice president. Well, there's a couple different things you have to understand. One, the vice president doesn't do anything but preside over the Senate. That's it. And two, if it's laws, the vice president doesn't pass laws. It has to have the unification of the House and the Senate. And so I think what happens now is we see people who know people don't research. We see people in high positions who know people don't understand how government works. So they say crazy crap on social media and people will run with it, right? But one of the things that Vice President Harris is talking about when she gets in office as president, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. And people were like, well, why has she done it now? She's the vice president. Yes. And she helps the president's agenda gets done. So her agenda is different from President Biden's agenda. They may be in unison, right? There may be some things they agree with, but there are some things that Vice President Harris wants to do that goes a little bit further than what President Biden wants to do. But also, we have a divided government. We don't have control of the House. So there are things that have been introduced that they want to do that has stopped in the House, that has passed out the Senate, but has stopped in the House. Yeah. So we have to make sure if we want to see all of these things that she's talking about and you agree with what she wants to do, you got to vote up and down the ticket to make sure they get the House, they get the Senate, and they get the president and watch things work.
Yeah. I was going to say, because it don't matter if she's there and it's still
divided.
Republicans,
yeah.
You know, she's not going to be able to do
Absolutely.
it.
So we got an opportunity to flip the entire table right here, y'all, in 36 days.
Absolutely.
Well, it may be, it may be closer than that by the time this air, but it's just saying what's at stake right now and the importance of your vote this presidential election, y'all.
Yeah, and I want to point out a couple different things. So, I can talk all day.
Yeah.
But I want to talk about a couple different things that as we're looking at a possible Harris-Walz administration on how we're going to impact from that, right? Let's take a look at what the Biden-Harris administration has already done. The Biden-Harris administration has invested historical amounts into HBCUs. The Biden-Harris administration has invested a historical amount in infrastructure, roads, transportation, and different things like that, right? And so someone had said to me, I can't remember what the exact quote was, and they said if something has gone wrong, if the light bulb won't turn on and you keep flipping the switch, you change the light bulb. Mm-hmm. And I was like, you're absolutely right. But this light bulb has been on. It can be brighter, and so we're going to make it brighter by putting Kamala Harris as our first Black Asian American president, right? And then you'll see the things. And I also have to tell people this. People are complaining about how things are expensive, how the economy is bad. You're absolutely right. And we have to tackle that head on. We are coming out of one of the worst world pandemics that we have ever seen, right? So there are still reaches of COVID that are still out there. When COVID was going on, nobody was traveling, so gas was dirtball cheap. And as soon as everybody got back on the road, gas skyrocketed, and people were complaining that because Joe Biden got in office, the gas prices went up. No, that's because y'all got your black butts back on the road again. So prices has gone up. But we have also seen, reports have shown that the reason why inflation has gone up, and believe it or not, even though it's terrible, don't get me wrong, I know it's been expensive and it's been bad, the US has had one of the lowest inflation rates in the entire world. So you think about how much we're paying and how much stuff has gone up, we still have had one of the lowest inflation rates in the world. But watch this now. The president doesn't control inflation. Inflation is done by the free market. We live in a capitalistic society. So when there's a need for a product, what happens to that price? And when businesses who control product see that you're going to pay more, what are they going to do? They still going to take the prices up because they see that no matter how much they keep increasing those prices, you are still going to keep buying that product because you need it, right? And so the way that prices are rising are not because of who's in the White House, but because of how we as consumers are paying and buying things. But it's also because these greedy business owners won't practice proper balance when it comes to how they're charging us, right? And so now that is something that the president can control. They can control what we are calling price gouging. And President Biden has already put some measures in place for that. But some things can be done through Congress to create laws to protect price gouging. But I also want to talk about on the flip side, right? What happens under a Trump-Vance administration? I got to throw this out there because people have been, it's all over TikTok, it's all over social media. We've been talking about this Project 2025 thing, right? Yeah. And so I have a friend who doesn't believe Project 2025 is real. I've shown him the website. I've printed it out for him. It's over 500 some odd pages. It is real. And he said, okay, well, if it's real, Trump didn't have anything to do with it. All right, so maybe Trump didn't write a chapter in it. Maybe Trump didn't have a quote in there. But when you look at who wrote Project 2025, Project 2025 is what we call a policy paper. So it's meant to be big and it's meant for you not to understand it because it's not for you to comprehend. It's a policy paper. There are over 140 writers who participated in Project 2025. Out of those 140 plus people, 140 of them were direct workers in the Trump administration this past 2017 to 2020. Yeah. I can call up some names like Ken Cuccinelli, who was from Virginia and worked in Trump's administration. Some of these people that aren't Trump, but worked for Trump. Trump didn't do what he wanted to do. It was his people who told him what to do, right? So maybe Trump didn't write a chapter in Project 2025, but his people did. And so when he gets in office, what's going to happen? They're going to implement those plans in Project 2025.
Can you give us, like, because we hear about it, and that's another scary thing we hear about, right? Is this project. What are the biggest things we need to be worried about?
And so, like I said, there's over 140 writers, right? But let's pull a page out of one of the chapters that dealt with public education. It's in there. I'm not telling you something that I heard someone say. I literally read it. And let me see. I got some quotes. Let me see. If I got the actual page numbers, it says to get rid of, verbatim, to demolish or eradicate the public school systems. Because we talked about earlier, they want to push kids to private schools, right? And so their goal is to get rid of public education. Second thing, they want to get rid of federal government jobs. Now, my mama works for the federal government. Y'all know anybody who works for the federal government? Y'all know anybody who works for the federal government? They want to get rid of federal government jobs and replace the federal government employees with Republican loyalist employees, which means you have to vote Republican, you have to be committed to the Republican Party, and if you're not, you're getting kicked out of your job, and then you're going to be replaced with somebody else. Now, that means even if you vote for Republicans, but you're not a Republican loyalist, you're getting fired too. They're also looking at a way, and it has been all over the news about the whole abortion ban thing, right? They're saying, I wouldn't support an abortion ban, I wouldn't support an abortion ban. But Republican-led states have already implemented abortion bans. We just heard about the black mother down south who died because they wouldn't allow her to have an abortion and she bled out. We have heard about the lady in Florida, the black mother in Florida, who, because she was having a complication with her pregnancy and the ban had already been enacted in Florida, they wouldn't allow her to have the abortion. So she went into the bathroom and bled out in the bathroom. Luckily, she survived. But this is not stories from American Horror Story. This is literally real American stories that are happening right now. It sounds like we're in the 1800s, right? These are stories of women who are being hurt because in their state, abortion bans have been enacted. And so maybe you won't enact a federal abortion ban, but you're going to make it easier for other states to enact those bans. And so Project 2025 wants to get rid of that. Project 2025 also wants to outlaw IVF, in vitro fertilization. They also want to get rid of certain other protective measures that women and people use when it comes to family planning. And so all of these things are in the project. They also want to get rid of the Department of Homeland Security. Wait a minute, what? A Republican, George W. Bush, created Homeland Security. They want to get rid of Homeland Security because they feel like all of these issues create big government, and the Republicans are for small government. And so cool, you want to be for small government, mind your business. Stay out of a woman's bedroom, stay out of the school system, and let the schools handle what they're going to handle. I'm just talking about what I'm talking about.
So so much of this election is based on fear, don't you think?
Absolutely.
So like, where do you go with that? Is it just, I feel like that's going to divide the government and the people even more.
And it's not going to, it already has, right? When we're looking at this. And again, like I said, I'm an elected Democrat, so I'm going to stick with my team. But there are horrors that you have to look at if this person gets in, if that person gets in, what they would do. I think one, we have to understand, to make sure people understand what they're voting for, number one, and also what they're voting to prevent. And so when you look at the other side, they're talking about your neighbor is kidnapping your cat, cooking them up and eating them. That was a lie. J.D. Vance even came out and said, yes, it was a lie, but I just needed to say something to get people to focus on the immigrant issue. Okay, so now you have caused people to be afraid of their next door neighbors because you want some talking points on TV, right? But when you look at, I attended the DNC this year. This is my first time going to a DNC. And when I tell you that it was legit live, when I tell you there was hope in the room, there was excitement in the room, there was like people were hyped to be in Chicago at the DNC to nominate Kamala Harris to be the next president of the United States. And I mean, the first time I voted was in 2008 for Obama. And I haven't felt that much energy since 2008, right? But when you flip over to the RNC and watch what they were doing, it was dry. They were like, yes, we're supporting President Trump. They were excited to support him, but they didn't have as much diversity. They did not have as much excitement. They didn't have as much notoriety. They didn't have as much coverage. And so for me, tell me who you want to vote for. Do you want to vote for people who want to keep things the same? Or do you want to vote for people who are going to take us into the future? Do you want to vote for people who make it sound like we're going back to the 1950s and the 1940s? Or do you want to vote for people who are going to drive us into the future and actually have plans, right? And I hear one of my friends right now saying, if you want to move forward when you drive, what do you put the car in? You put it in D. If you want to go backwards, what do you put the car in? You put it in R. So if you want to go forward, you vote for the Democrats. If you want to go backwards, you vote for the Republicans.
I like that. Man. So if what should I say? If or when? I know what you're gonna say, but if what happens is like Trump is in trouble, right? He got a sentencing and all of that. Like
there is a lot. I don't know all the legality that goes into it. He still has some pending cases that are out there. And this has been something that has never happened before in America's history, right? We literally have, not that he has charges pending, he's been convicted on some of those charges already. So we literally have a felon who's running for president. Meanwhile, some of our brothers and sisters can't even vote right now because they have felonies on their records.
That's what I don't quite understand, man.
Yeah, how it's allowed. Is it because they never seen it? There's no rules?
Because it's a rich white man who's running for the highest office in the country. And so and this is why I'm also talking, right? Because, and I'm talking to my brothers because they got a bunch of black brothers who are voting for Trump. And I need y'all to understand, he's going to be able to do things that y'all can't do, not just because he's the president, but because he's looking out for himself and his partners. And when he talks about these tax cuts, listen, if you have to fill up your soap dish with water to make your soap last, he's not looking out for you. If you are on food stamps and you have to go to the store and sell those food stamps to make sure you got some money, he's not looking out for you. And so we got to make it plain, right? These people get caught up on these talking points that Trump talks, and some people will say he's talking good. He's talking crazy. He's lying, and he's looking out for the people who can afford to get him in that position. And that's not many of us, right? And so when we listen to Vice President Harris, who talks about working at McDonald's, listen to people like me, who used to be a stocker at Hollister at Spotsylvania Town Center, looking at Tim Waltz, who was a school coach and teacher, looking at people who are doing the work and then getting to where they are to make sure that life can change for us. I don't know about you, but I ain't never seen a broke Republican. And so how do they identify with the struggles that we have, right? And so when they are doing these things, they are actively dividing us because they know if we are divided, then they can get whatever they want done, and then we can't get anything done. Martin Luther King or Malcolm X, I can't remember, but it was a quote from the Civil Rights Movement said, "Black people and poor white people have more in common than we do together, than we do divided." But watch this. The powers that be will teach and train working class white folks and poor white folks that as long as you're not black, it's going to be all right. And so now we have people who are voting against their interests, hoping that life is going to. Please tell me how you are voting for business. Watch this. Businesses who are donating billions of dollars to Republican candidates to vote against the minimum wage increase. And you're making minimum wage. Make it make sense. You are voting for people who businesses are donating billions of dollars to get into office just so they can vote against paid sick days. And you sit and got to take off of work. Now your paycheck is less this month than it was last month. Make it make sense. So you are supporting people who aren't supporting you, but because they're talking about transgender kids, because they're talking about abortion, because they're talking about gay marriage, oh yeah, we're going to vote for them.
Yeah. They running off those triggers, those inflammatory words and topics.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that's what's at stake here, man. You know, it's beyond, beyond words, man.
Yeah.
This is a big deal here.
And I tell people all the time, whenever you feel like your voice doesn't matter, and it varies for different areas, right? Because if you live in Hampton Roads, which is a heavily Democratic area, and you're a black person who would typically vote Democrat, but you don't vote anymore, you could say your voice doesn't matter. If you live in Southwest Virginia, a red rural area, and you are a Republican voter, and you just feel like the Republicans aren't looking out for you, and you don't want to vote either way, maybe you could say your vote doesn't matter. But I want to tell people that no matter what you do, your vote is always going to matter. In these areas like Fredericksburg, in Prince William County, in Chesterfield, where the margins are razor thin, every single vote matters. And this is a presidential election where they are calling it a complete toss-up. No person is able to determine if Harris is going to win, if Trump is going to win. The polling has Harris slightly in the lead today, then tomorrow Trump is slightly in the lead. So this race is a complete toss-up, and we don't know who's going to win. But I can tell you right now, my uncle called me a couple of months ago when Biden said he was stepping down and he was endorsing Harris. He said, "Is it real?" I was like, "Yeah, it's real." "Oh man, I'm gonna vote for her, but I don't think she can win." "Just vote for her and she gonna win." Yeah. That's the thing, right? And if you are sick and tired of the issues that are facing you, if you're sick and tired of not having money in your pocket, if you're sick and tired of fighting at the school because the school won't do this for your child or whatever, you have to make sure you get up and that you go out and vote. And don't just vote up and down the ticket for the red paper that was given to you as you walk in. Make sure you do your research and find out who's supporting the things you want to get done. And make sure you're finding out the stuff that is real and not the stuff they're just saying and putting out there just to get a TikTok created to keep posting all over the place.
Yeah, that's real, man. And like you say, those trigger points, there's different topics that affect people more than others personally. And that's really what, you gotta think about. And then I say, well, how do you hold a president accountable? When they campaign on this particular thing, once they're in, they're in. So it's like, how do you hold them accountable and make them hold their word after you gave them your vote? And I think that's the most disheartening thing, because you're banking on that, of them doing what they say. So
that's a good question, and that happens with any elected official, right? One of the major ways that we hold elected officials accountable is by voting. My mentor, Senator Jennifer Carroll Foy, says it like this: if I can't change your mind, I'm going to change your seat. If you told me you're going to do something and you don't do it, now here's a caveat. If you can't do it, I get it, because there are presidents who run on something, get in, have a divided government, and they can't get things done. That's something different, right? But if you have full control of the House, full control of the Senate, and the president, like Trump did in 2016 and still didn't get the wall built, please tell me why I'm going to continue to support you. Because the things that you campaigned on, you have the full wherewithal to do it, and then you don't do it, right? But then say a president says they're going to do something and they can't get it done because of the divided government. We still have checks and balances because we have the ability to have conversations with our folks in Congress, right? Our U.S. Senator and our congressional representative. And we can say, I noticed you voted against this, but the majority of these people in this district support this. Why did you vote against that? Or if you see that you have a congressional person that you don't agree with, find another congressional person that you do agree with and say, hey, I live in this person's district. You know how their politics are. I want you to support this, right? And it happens in Richmond all the time. I get emails from people who say, we want you to support this. We want you to support this. We want you to support this. And if I'm good on the issue, I'll respond, I'm good here. If it's an issue that I'm not too sure about, I'll respond to the email and say, thank you for emailing me about this. I'm not familiar. Can you catch me up to speed? Can you tell me what's going on or why I should support this, right? And so don't ever think that your voice doesn't matter. It doesn't just end after Election Day. You need to make sure you're emailing your elected officials, that you're communicating with your elected officials, especially when it's about an issue that you're passionate about. And let me challenge you. Don't email your elected officials only when you're in trouble. Email them when it's about an issue in your community that you don't know who can handle it, who can control it, and reach out to them and start building those relationships with them. So when you do need them, it's easier to reach out to them.
Absolutely, absolutely. You got any more questions, Reese?
Oh man, spill it all.
We lay it thick on y'all every time, man.
A lot of education. We appreciate that. Man.
Absolutely, man. Well, it's always an honor and a pleasure.
Appreciate you, family.
Appreciate you for coming
appreciate
on.
You.
For the fourth time, man. We done broke another record, y'all.
We gonna hold it strong.
For real, man. Nah, but God bless y'all and get out and vote this election. This is no cap, y'all.
Yo.